I will vacate the stage and hand you over to Simon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And please just take your jackets off if you're okay. That's more than enough, I think. So let me set this up. It's often said that the TMT sector leads the way in the development of alternative workplace practices. They have often been the early adopters, producing innovative and sometimes quirky workplace designs. So what can we learn from the TMT sector as we strive to enhance our workspaces to create an energy, and I'll use that word that Philip used, and vitality that can attract, retain and nurture our knowledge workers? I'm fortunate today to have three leaders from the TMT sector to join the panel to discuss some of the trends that we have observed with TMT companies, along with two of my specialist Cushman colleagues. So if I could invite you all to come up on the stage, please. Thank you. Yeah, you're third along, Doug. Third. That's it. Sorry. One more.
I'll go that way.
Fourth. Okay. Fourth along. Yeah, that's it. Julia. Thanks. So we'll forget that mugshot. So working from nearest to furthest, we have Duncan Painter, CEO of the Top Right Group, Juliet Morgan, property specialist from Tech City, Doug Lowry, EMEA Regional Workplace Strategist from Microsoft, Neil McLaughlin, Head of Global Workplace Consulting for EMEA at Cushman, and finally, Mike Davis, Technology Sector Specialist and Partner in the London West End office team. So, I talked about the trends that we've identified, and here they are. We've got 5. I'll just read them out very quickly to you. The primary function of a building is to facilitate collaboration, and therefore workplace design is increasingly important for the purpose of global and local collaboration. Second, real estate flexibility is important as the companies in this sector rapidly change. Third, attracting talent, especially young talent, drives many decisions, including office design, importance of local amenities, provision of bike racks, etc. Fourth, flexibility in the way space is used is more about attracting talent and collaboration rather than reducing footprint. And last but not least, real estate in absolute cost terms is not important. The value of clusters of knowledge is far greater. These can be in cheap or expensive locations. So I think we've got time to take 3 of those, and we're going to take the top one first. So the primary function of a building is to facilitate collaboration, and therefore workplace design is increasingly important, both for the purpose of global and local collaboration. Doug, if I can start with you. I know you haven't got a CEO right now, but let's imagine you have.
We're hiring.
You're hiring. So you've got to imagine better than most what the CEO's reaction would be to that statement.
So if I take the old CEO, Steve Ballmer, he comes from the dev world. So when we're talking about collaboration, I think it's very important to understand what that means for the different activities and people within an organization. We've got to remember we're not all individual contributors, or we're not all information workers. Sometimes we have administrational, we have development, we have research. Each one of those needs a different type of environment. So I would probably switch that question to be more around how do we achieve individual effectiveness? And when relate that to workplace design, it's not about creating these breakout spaces with some sofas in it. It's really about looking at the activities that take place in the office and providing suitable environments for those activities, for the individual to choose, to be empowered to actually go to those spaces to achieve what they need to achieve.
Sounds like you've got your elevator speech for the new CEO as well. Good stuff. Juliet, what do you think the reaction of your CEO would be to this?
I think that collaboration is one aspect of what's going on. I think also the purpose of the building is to facilitate work and high productive work. So absolutely collaboration is really important, but there's also recognised trend of the rise of the introvert, that people actually need the ability to kind of go off to different places. And so really I think workplace design is about coming up with spaces that facilitate where the best ideas are made and increase productivity for the company. I also think we're seeing a lot of design expressing brand and values, both for visitors and for employees of those spaces. So, and just recognising that the building's a tool, it's got to stay flexible over time. So whatever that fit out is, it needs to be responsive.
Interesting, you mentioned the introvert and the rise of the introvert. I think there was always a slight sense of inadequacy about being labelled an introvert in the old days, but I think your point's very valid in terms of recognising, what they need as much as the extroverts. Duncan, you are a CEO. So what's your reaction to that statement?
Yeah, so perhaps put it slightly into context and then give the answer. I mean, I took over as CEO of what was EMAP PLC that was taken private 2 years ago, and it'd been declining for 5 years as a company. And so one of the key decisions we did make, or I made very early on, sort of almost in reverse of the statement made earlier actually, is that we, and that puts into context then the buildings, is we adopted very heavily collaboration technology rollout across all of our 2,000 staff. We turn over about $500 million of turnover across all functions. So we rolled that out as a prerequisite to then what we wanted to do with property. We see actually sort of slightly in difference, property for us today, we serve business-to-business clients, is actually about, for us, the primary purpose of it is bringing customers and our people together. And it's amazing in this highly, world with all this great communication technology. The number one problem we have as a business is actually that forces people to communicate less than more. And what's ironic is they seem to spend a lot less time wanting to communicate with customers than they used to. So, for us, the vast majority of our space, and by the way, in parallel to that, technology upgrade, we moved pretty much across 23 countries, all of our buildings in that 2-year period. So because we wanted environments that did inspire customers with us and create environments. So I would say probably 70%, 60 to 70% of all our entire workspace is now dedicated to environments where our people spend time with our customers.
Terrific. Yeah, terrific. Thank you. Neil, you've been working with our CEO, so you could sort of draw on that experience, or you might want to draw on some experiences from other clients you've worked with. But what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, certainly we've been looking at how we work in Cushman's, and certainly our CEO was very keen on the collaboration aspect and the cross-selling opportunity within our business to look at how we worked and how we worked with our clients. And I think clearly certainly one of the things that differentiates Cushman is our culture and the way we collaborate. And I guess in the wider picture, and talking about other clients, particularly in the tech sector, clearly collaboration is important. But actually another word that comes up even more so in my experience with our clients is the word cohesion. And certainly in business school, thinking a lot, cohesion and the sense of purpose and sense of belonging of a business is really, really important. Often it's cited as culture is more important than business strategy now. And actually getting that sort of sense of culture, sense of belonging, sense of wanting to achieve. And I think that's really, really important, and that is mostly even more important, getting the right culture, the right balance of people, the right diversity, the right balance between introverts and extroverts, the right sense of we're on a mission here and we're going to achieve. And I think the workplace is a really, really important, powerful agent to achieve that sort of sense of mission. I think it builds on a lot of what we heard about this morning and what we talked about with Yahoo and other organisations. And if you haven't got the people in the building, how do you create that culture? How do you create that sense of purpose and sense of belonging?
Terrific. Thank you. So, thank you to those of you who took part in the survey prior to today. I can now reveal that over 62% of the audience work within the professional services sector. We asked whether you agree, partially agree, or disagree with this trend, and as you can see, 68% agree, 30% partially agree, and only 2% disagree. So a pretty resounding agreement with that one. Okay, let's move on. The second trend we're going to pick out is this one. Attracting talent, especially young talent, drives many decisions, including office design, importance of local amenities, provision of bike racks, etc. So, same question, I guess. Doug, your reaction to this, or what do you think your new CEO or old CEO's reaction is to this?
I think this is a very interesting one. There's a couple of points in there which I somewhat disagree or agree with. Young talent, I would disagree that it's all about young talent. I'd say it's about diversity within your workforce. Yes, we have graduate programs at Microsoft, but we also have we target the expertise that we want, whether that be an older generation, whoever, whether it be more female, etc. So I don't necessarily agree with the young piece, but I think there is a big push on attraction and retention of staff, and the workplace has a huge part to play in that, how we express our value, how we express our brand, and that is difficult to prove in a return on investment piece when you're making the investment of a workplace, but we do try to make our workplaces appropriate for the activities taking place in them, the people that we hire, and we obviously we want our employees to be happy.
Yeah, perfect. As someone that's nearer the end of his career than at the beginning, I was delighted with your comment about the younger people. So, Juliet, what do you think your CEO's reaction to this would be?
I think it's definitely important, but I think it comes somewhere down the food chain of decision drivers. So cost and location, is it available, is the lease term correct? The traditional drivers of what makes that decision happen, there at the back end is what's the design and will that work on the attraction and retention piece. So I think it's always about balancing the location against the cost and can you get people to go there. On the piece about youth, I think there is a misconception that's kind of hitting the design trend in TMT sector, that we see a lot of imagery of slides and ping pong tables, and it's heading towards the kind of, it's not really very respectful. I think it's about designing great environments that attract all sorts of people in the same way that the hotel industry does, and I think that's, talking to the designers I connect with, that's more where they seem to be headed.
Okay, cool, thank you. Duncan?
Yeah, I as with all these things, I mean, I would agree and disagree with some of what's been said. I think the number one challenge, certainly in media, maybe slightly different to tech, is, people are still the number one challenge. So having the best people is the difference between good results and bad results. And we know this because we went through 5 years of decline. We've just been through 2 years of substantial growth. And that's because we changed and got the right people and put them in great working environments. So we know it works. That's why, I would take a very different view perhaps to your CEO, which is I would pick location, quality of location, and the environment in which we'll put our people well above what it costs or where it is, and we think about it very differently. In fact, I think about a lot of my office space is actually, in the P&L, is actually a cost of marketing, because we got a lot of customers coming there, we got a lot of other things. So, I don't see it as a cost, I see it as a capability to drive the top line of the business, and we changed it, we got it right, and in 2 years we're now outgrowing our peers by nearly 5 times on organic growth. So, the ROI can really be there. It's not just young people, it's just the best people. We don't care what age they are, and it's having professional environments that they really enjoy and want to be part of. And so, I think too much time is spent on location and cost, and if businesses really thought about, the cost of all the people that are then put in it, the reality is that the actual facilities cost will become a lot less of an issue, I think.
Yeah, interesting comment you make about marketing cost. And if you want to get involved in that debate, there is a LinkedIn discussion group going on that, which we started yesterday, so please join in. I think it's a really interesting topic. It's It's pretty self-evident in retail banks and retailers, but when you think about the office environment, then I think there's some really interesting points to think about. Mike, what about your clients? How do they react to this?
It's an interesting one because obviously the TMT sector is a very broad sector. I mean, tallying with what Duncan and Juliet were saying, at one end you've got slightly more conservative occupiers, and then obviously at the other end you've got, very, very zany designs that everybody's seen in and around the internet. I mean, the key differential I would make is this is a trend that originally was born out of the West Coast. So if you go to San Francisco, a lot of these occupiers have much lower overheads, lower rents. The landlords are quite philanthropic and encourage people to take probably more space than they need to at day one in the hope that they'll grow. And so they can afford to spend it on that. And also people forget the jobs market for technology companies is extremely strong in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And so what they tend to use is the workplace as a differentiator. Wages are wages. Frankly, people can jump around and probably ratchet up their wages quite quickly, but it's actually about young people enjoying themselves in the workplace. Something that's come over from San Francisco that we're very much aware of is actually how little influence external architecture has on a technology company's choice of building. I mean, a great example, you've probably seen it in the press, is Karmarama at Farringdon Road. They took an extremely ugly building from the outside. It was bland, it was cheap rent, but they spent the money that they probably would have spent on rent making an extremely attractive workplace, which is now held out as one of the best places to work in central London. So it's quite interesting to see that shift, because if you've gone back probably 5 or so years ago, developers would have said, okay, I need to build this extremely attractive glass and steel box, lots of natural light. Actually, technology companies aren't as fixated on that.
Hopefully the original building architect is not in the room to take offence to that. But there we go, perfect. So on this one, in terms of the survey, actually exactly, I think, the same result as the previous question. So 68 agree, 30 partially agree, and only 2 disagree. But I can reveal there's a different answer for question 3. So I think we've got time for one more. So we've picked this one. Trend 3, flexibility in the way space is used is more about attracting talent and collaboration than reducing footprint. Think about what you've seen in the industry, particularly in the last 5 years. What's your reaction to that, Doug?
I think it's both. I would probably start to look at organisational behaviour and how management trends need to up their game as well, to go away from the hierarchical and more into the spider diagrams that we were seeing earlier. That's where I always start as a workplace strategist when I go into a new subsidiary. I want to talk to that leadership team to understand what their vision is, what their goals, and we'll design a workplace that will reflect that. Quite often, in order to do that, it means reducing the footprint to free up the capital to achieve what they want to really do. And if you go back to Phil Ross's comments around the very empty building that he was looking in Silicon Valley, and that's common in large organizations. 50% is frankly hitting a good day. What we're challenged with now is trying to figure out, well, out of those 50%, where are they spending their time? So it's interesting to look at those heat maps of where people are spending time in the building. We're looking at that now. Obviously, with bringing in Nokia. Nokia have got some interesting technology in that. So we're looking at that to see, are we building the right stuff?
Right.
A lot of time it's not. So let's be smarter about our investments here.
I think people are getting a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah.
As you
Sensory
imply.
technology is going to take over that.
Yeah. Juliet, what about your CEO's thoughts on this, do you think?
I think the tech companies that I work with seem to be projecting values and culture of openness and lack of hierarchy. So there seems to be quite a lot of demand for open floor plates, and that's kind of driving the asset being sweated a little bit, offering different environments for people to work in, and recognising that people are off-site or they're working from home in technology and enabling them to use the office as someone that you kind of touch into. So I agree with what you've said, that it seems to be kind of hand in hand, that this flexibility piece goes together with a reduced footprint. I don't think one's driving the other particularly.
Yeah. Duncan?
Yeah, I think, look, at the end of the day, it's horses for courses, but from our perspective, we we didn't, in fact, we moved 5 businesses in London. If we take the London move we didn't reduce any footprint, but what we did do is the footprint that we're not using to seat desks is now used entirely for customer environments and customer centres and the best collaboration with customers with our people, no matter what role they've got in the company. And in fact, you're coming back, it's not just about floor print, there's obviously cost. And so for some of our businesses, we went from Camden to Piccadilly. So, we believed so strongly that we needed to be right in the centre where most of our customer heartland was in that city. The cost per square foot doubled. We kept exactly the same square footage, but we just dedicated a significantly larger section of it to customer-facing space. And we are in that world where we don't have 50% of the office is empty. We're actively encouraging people to get customers in as much as possible, because most of them, ironically, find it very difficult to find anywhere to meet with people. And that means that, actually our workspace areas are pretty busy. And then we've got that balance of a lot of customer-facing environments. So I think, from our perspective, it's that getting that just different look at what property's about. Is it a sales tool, or is it somewhere for someone to sit and work?
Certainly seeing some of my customers differentiate the customer space and spend a lot more on it and make it a lot more accessible. That's very clear, and obviously you can see that in the retail side of things as well. Neil, any trends with the clients you're dealing with?
Particularly in the TMT sector, I think there's a real strong understanding that the workplace really needs to align to activity. And the other point about that is activity changes significantly over time. It's not a static thing. The business grows, business changes, but I think as an industry we have a mindset that the only change happens at a lease expiry event rather than actually as the business evolves and develops. And I guess, particularly again in the TMT sector, the nature of work is much more dynamic. Having software development teams forming and norming and storming, at different stages of an evolution of a product. You have agile development techniques where they need to form together to create scrums and share progress, and we talked about some of that stuff this morning. But understanding the activity and then actually creating a workplace with multiple settings that align to that activity and is dynamic, that changes to reflect the changes in that activity over time, is what we need to do to support a great organisation and develop that culture I talked about before.
Brilliant. Mike, you do a lot of work with the media part of the sector in particular. What are you finding from them?
I think flexibility can be used to attract talent, but it's normally as a byproduct to design. I think if you interrogate what people actually use their space for, a lot of let's take the advertising sector. They have project teams for specific projects, maybe 6 months for 12 months. But then those projects fall away, and they've obviously then got to revert to using the workspace for normal duties, or they've got another project team to use that space. And it's quite interesting how that's changed a little bit. We've had a prolonged economic downturn. So for the last 5 years, as Juliette was saying, people have been really sweating their assets, packing a lot of people in there, not necessarily sort of concentrating on how they use the space to get the best out of it. And it's quite interesting because now we're coming out the other side. People are now much more aware of this. Companies are expanding. The advertising spend has gone up. And so they're looking at creative ways of utilising that to get the best out of the projects and stimulate the working environment as well. And also, it's quite interesting how a lot of companies are now looking at the fundamentals of their businesses. Before, it was all about financials. Now it's just about stimulating the output. So and we anticipate that's going to continue going forward.
War for talent, and the competitive war is raging again, huh?
Absolutely right.
Well, it never stopped, of course, quite frankly. Okay, and the survey results on this one, I did promise you a different result. So we got 36% agree with this statement. Pretty much half partially disagree, which is kind of what I felt I was hearing from the panel here. And 12% disagree. So I think probably an answer you would expect, certainly given the reactions of the panel here. Right, we've got a few minutes for Q&A. If in putting your question you want to ask one of the panelists specifically, then just shout that out. Otherwise, I'll allocate the questions for you. Got one over here.
Got there eventually. Claudia Conway, the RICS Property Journal. This will perhaps particularly for Neil. I'd be interested to hear what you think about this idea. I've heard a lot about lately that property is moving from being sort of the provision of a physical building and more to being a service. Do you see that happening in your work, and does it apply more to the TMT sector than others?
A service in terms of more towards third space you're talking about, and the liquid space we talked about before. Is that the type of question? Okay. Yeah, I think again horses for courses, different functions. Yeah, again it's about get back to basics, get the data right, understand the activity of the workforce and the need, and then get the right property solutions to support that. If you are having a sales environment, and you want to collaborate with customers, then there are plenty of opportunities to do that in third space solutions. But I also think it's really, really important to nurture the heart of the organisation, and I think there's a strong, importance to have somewhere in the organisation, somewhere that is home, and actually does do that. Again, culture is more important than business strategy. What is your culture? How do you define that? And I think your own workplace is really important to do that. It doesn't mean you don't use third space solutions in some place, but there still needs to be a place that is yours. And I think it's very hard to actually create this sort of really virtual organisation without that.
Doug, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just tie into that. It's really about cultural identity, and I guess the answer to the question would be it depends on the scale and the scale of the business you're talking about. I mean, for Microsoft, I can't see that working apart from to support our more mobile people, our salespeople, when they're out in the field. They're saying a place to pop in, but they do that naturally anyway, so it's kind of more organic. We are looking at things like that when we got subsidiaries with 4 or 5 people in Central Eastern Europe and places like that. Does it make sense to have the full operation costs of a full office when it's attended maybe by 1 or 2 people a day? Then you start to look at options like that as well.
Terrific.
The IT guys don't like that though.
Let's have another question. Yes.
Hi, Stephen Lambert from MCS. One question about the war for talent, especially young talent. You could argue, if you want to challenge that there is a recession going on still in big parts of the world, especially in Europe. It may not feel like that in London sometimes, but if you cross the channel, it definitely feels like that sometimes. And so is it really not about attracting young talent, because some people call that the lost generation that is happy to get any job, and you don't really have to fight for those? But it's more about accommodating an ecosystem of users of your workspace that aren't always employees. There could be partners, consultants, self-employed people that come in for a few weeks or months, customers, and really being responsible for accommodating all those, which your corporate real estate doesn't always want to admit or pay for, but it's really about that.
Right. Duncan.
Yeah, so I think, look, flexibility around what you're trying to attract into the business is important, and it's not just about young people. But what I can say to you is that getting talent of people, when we say young, I suppose I can't afford to say this because I'm not that young. Young to us is between 25 and 35, and they're out of graduation. They've been in work for a number of years. They've actually got really usable skills, and ironically, recession or no recession, the best people in that range are still very hard to attract. Graduates, of course you want that pool of young people coming through, but I think it is about, and for us, we build IP. I mean, that's what we do as organisations. We build intellectual property, so the last thing we want to do is have, well, certainly on my side, the least thing we want to do is have too many third parties involved in that. Because the reality is, in this modern world, you just discover your IP in other people's products fairly rapidly otherwise. So, it's that talent pool that we still struggle for, recession or no recession. We still, I could go back today and I'd talk to my people teams, and they would say, you know, how many have we still got outstanding at the right calibre? And we're very choosy, I suppose, but the right calibre, and there'll be a long list, a long list.
Yeah. Juliet, what about the companies that you're working for? What are you seeing? Working with, I should say, I'm sorry.
That's all right. It really varies from the kind of startup TMT who are all sat co-working, and quite often I see them exit when they want to protect that IP, particularly when they want to protect their developers. So that's when they go for that first transaction. It reminded me of a project I was working on with some architects 5 years ago, where we were designing a floor plate like a conch shell, so that the further and further you got into the floor plate, the more privacy you encountered with the company. And I think that sort of thinking will kick back in post-recession.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mike, any thoughts?
It's quite interesting because if you tackle it just in the tech sector, I think it's more of a generational thing. I think people now are a lot more, you know, if you ask somebody who's 18 to 21, they'll look at their career completely differently to how I'm 32, how I looked at it, you know, that it's a lot more vocational. They're not looking at this as a time horizon of 10 or 20 years. They're thinking, do you know what, I'll try it for 3 years, and if it doesn't work, I'll go off and do something else, you know, or they'll go travelling or what have you. So they will look at their workplace as what reflects them best, and also what they can basically brag to their mates about. You know, when I was in San Francisco, it was all about, you know, who's got the best place to work, because they all know they're on good wages, and it's more about that. This is for the younger generation. You know, I think past 25, it starts getting a little bit more traditional, but that's what we're seeing from the grassroots level.
Brilliant. I think we've got time for one more question. I've seen a hand here in the middle. I don't want to stand between you and lunch for too long, but...
Thanks. Hi, it's Jim Reed from Arup. The trend about 10, 15 years ago was that we were all desperate to make the most of the space, and now we're making the most of the people in that space. And hence, I was intrigued by your statements about attracting good talent, and particularly young people, to a great place to work, great location. We talked about a great quality of space and environment and stuff. And that's all very well, but I put it to the panel that let's not forget what I think is the most important thing, and employers shouldn't hide behind this, but the most important thing as far as I'm concerned is the job any good, and do people get fulfilled by it? And that is only partly buoyed up by good space and good environment. It's the employer and the job itself that counts, surely.
Doug. Your turn.
No, I absolutely agree, and I mean, you're not going to put your heart and soul into this if you don't enjoy it, if you don't like it. So, from a real estate point of view, we make sure that people are happy. We know that happy people generally like doing what they're doing. If they don't like to do it, then they're probably going to leave and go somewhere else. It does bring it back to the previous conversation about IP. I don't necessarily agree with what was said around protection of IP. Certainly in Microsoft it used to be like that. Like you had to work for the company for 10 years to get you even close to the Windows kernel. But I mean, now I see interns, I see graduates working on highly confidential projects within Microsoft. I see really great talent, and the way to keep those talent is to keep them engaged, give them work that they want to do, they want to make better. And that's where you start getting into that management structure and the kind of organizational behavior that I was talking about earlier.
Neil, what do you hear from our clients on this?
I think it goes back to the survey, the key issues that are facing CEOs from the boardroom review. The number one issue at the moment is human capital. And you know, how do we maximise human capital? And that's the first time human capital has ever been number one, by the way. It's the first time now we're sort of emerging out of this recession, I guess, that growth is the agenda and how we organise our human capital. And that goes back to this sort of, you know, culture is more important than strategy. If we get great people, we organise them in the right way, we maximise the enjoyment of being, you know, this sense of belonging and this sense of mission, sense of purpose, that actually creates great output, and they produce great products, and it becomes a circle that's reinforcing and then attracts more people, and that creates a great brand, and and the workplace does have an important role to play in that. So I think it's very much about focusing on that human capital and how it's all organised in the broadest sense of that. and that creates great organisations.
Perfect. As the CEO on the panel, Duncan, I'm going to give you the last word.
You know, look, at the end of the day, I mean, one of the advantages of being in media and technology is most of the businesses that you're in, certainly the ones that we own, you know, we got 39 brands that are number 1 or number 2 in their market. So most of the people who are very passionate about what they want to do, and that's the industry they want to serve, want to work for one of those brands. So, and the jobs tend to be very good. But what I can say to you is I can give you the yin and the yang. When we had very poor workspace and a very bad environment for our people to work in, we had about 38% turnover of staff. In 2 years, when we've got really good workspace and really good environments for people to work in, and they're much more technology, collaborative, etc., we now have 15% turnover of staff. So, you know, to say it doesn't contribute, I know factually it absolutely does. And the reason for that is because a lot of our people are so passionate about the jobs that they do, and for many of them, their career is their life, whether they, I'm sure they don't want to admit that, but the reality is just sheer hours that they do at work tells me that it is. Because, you know, some of my people can be in the office 16 hours a day, 15, 16 hours, you know, they live there. And if you live somewhere, you kind of want to enjoy where you live, you know, and it's, you know, so, you know, and that is, I think, one of the big phenomenons of technology and whatever, is you get these staff that are so passionate about what they do that there is no concept of working hours. You know, they'll just work till they've got the problem or what they're working on done. So, yeah, you know, I've got physical evidence that demonstrates great working environments, right people, good jobs, can't get away from that key point, really does make a big difference. And for us, I mean, we paid for moving 400 people from Camden to Piccadilly just on retention of staff, good staff, just in not having to recruit replacements. I mean, just that alone paid for most of the property increase.
Fascinating. Well, thank you very much. I hope that was of interest. Thank you very much to our panellists. Let's thank them on your behalf.